The year was 1973. Nixon was still in the White House. Elvis was selling out arenas, and American fathers across the country were working long hours to provide for their families. But one man, John Miller, a mechanic from Ohio, was about to lose something more valuable than any paycheck or car he ever fixed. His little girl. She was just 4 years old when, after a bitter divorce, his ex-wife took her away. He never saw her again. No phone calls, no letters, just silence. Now, think about that for a moment. Can you imagine tucking your child into bed one night, and then suddenly they're gone the next day, and decades roll by without a single word? Stick with me. The next part will surprise you. Because nearly 40 years later, when John was already in his 60s, with gray hair and tired hands from decades under the hood of cars, he would finally come face to face with the daughter he thought he had lost forever. But what happened in between, that's where the real story lies. John never stopped thinking about her. Every oil change, every engine rebuilt, every 4th of July barbecue when he saw families gather together, he wondered where she was. Was she safe? Did she even remember him? He kept one photo of her in a shoebox, tucked behind his old baseball cards and a yellowed copy of Life magazine from the moon landing. Some nights, when the house was quiet, he'd take it out, stare at those big brown eyes, and whisper, "Daddy's still here." Years turned into decades. He remarried, raised stepchildren, worked 60-hour weeks, and tried to move on. But there was always that empty chair at the dinner table. Do you know that feeling? When part of your heart is missing, no matter how much you try to fill it with work, friends, or even faith. Then came the 1990s when the internet was beginning to connect the world. John heard stories of people finding long-lost relatives through email and message boards. He tried, but every lead came up empty. Life pushed him forward through the turn of the millennium, through 9/11, through the wars overseas. The world kept changing, but John's question never did. Where's my daughter? And then, one winter morning in 2011, while sipping his coffee from a chipped Ford Mustang mug, he got a letter in the mail. Not email, not phone call. A real letter written in careful, nervous handwriting. He opened it slowly, and what he read made his hands shake. The letter began with 4 words that made John's breath catch in his chest. "I think I'm your daughter." Her name was Sarah now. She wrote that she had grown up believing her father had abandoned her. That was the story she had been told. But as the years passed, doubts crept in. A cousin had slipped up one Thanksgiving, mentioning a man named John who never stopped looking. That single comment sent her searching, and eventually, she found him. John read the letter 3 times, tears smudging the ink. After nearly 4 decades of wondering, of praying, here was proof his little girl was alive. But the letter ended with a question that stopped him cold. "Do you want to meet me?" Think about that for a moment. 40 years of silence, and suddenly the door swings open. Would you be ready to walk through it? Would you know what to say? John folded the letter carefully, like it was something sacred. He sat in his garage that night, surrounded by the smell of grease and the hum of a radio playing old Creedence Clearwater Revival, and thought about his next step. He knew one thing. If she was reaching out, he wasn't about to let her slip away again. So he picked up the phone the next day and dialed the number she had left at the bottom of the page. The line rang once, twice, and then, after all those years, he finally heard her voice. But what she said in that first conversation changed everything. Her voice was steady, but you could hear the nerves. She said, "I don't know what to believe anymore. All my life, I was told you didn't care, that you just left us." John's throat tightened. How do you explain decades of silence in a single phone call? He took a deep breath and said, "Sweetheart, I never stopped caring. I never stopped looking. They took you from me, but you were never out of my heart." There was a long pause on the line. John could hear her breathing, the faint sound of traffic in the background. Then she whispered, "I want to see you." And just like that, a meeting was set. They chose a diner off the interstate. One of those classic spots with neon lights and red leather booths. The kind of place John used to take her when she was a toddler, back when a milkshake could fix just about anything. The morning of a reunion, John dressed in his best jacket, polished his old Chevy pickup, and drove with his heart pounding harder than any engine he'd ever rebuilt. When he pulled into the parking lot, he almost turned back. He was terrified. What if she hated him? What if she only came to confirm the worst? But then, through the diner window, he saw her. A grown woman now, with the same brown eyes from that faded photo he kept for 40 years. She stood up as he walked in. Neither of them spoke at first. They just stared, both frozen by the weight of lost years. And then, slowly, she stepped forward. She wrapped her arms around him, and for the first time in nearly 40 years, John held his daughter again. He could feel her shoulders shaking as she cried into his chest, and all he could whisper was, "I'm here. I'm here now." They sat down in that booth, 2 cups of coffee between them, and began to stitch together a broken past. Sarah told him about her childhood, how she grew up believing he had walked away, how birthdays came and went without him, how she wondered if she wasn't worth staying for. John listened, fighting back tears, and told her the truth. The custody battles, the slammed doors, the letters that were never delivered. He confessed his failures too. The nights he drowned his pain in work instead of fighting harder. The fear that maybe she wouldn't want him even if he found her. It wasn't easy. Some moments were raw, even painful. But then there were lighter moments too. They laughed when she learned he still drove that old Chevy, the same truck she once rode in with a teddy bear bigger than she was. She teased him for still drinking his coffee black, just like in the photo she had uncovered in a family album. Hours passed like minutes. The diner's neon lights flickered on as the sun went down, and still, they sat there talking, healing. And then Sarah looked at him and asked the question that nearly broke him all over again. "Do you still think of me as your daughter after all this time?" John leaned forward, took her hand, and said, "Sweetheart, being your father isn't something I stopped doing. It's who I am. It's who I've always been." What are your thoughts? Share your memories in the comments. But just when John thought he had been given back everything he had lost, Sarah revealed a secret of her own, one that would change not just his life, but his entire legacy. Sarah hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. Then she said softly, "Dad, there's someone you need to meet." John blinked. "Meet?" he asked. She smiled nervously. "Your granddaughter." For a moment, the diner seemed to fall silent. John's fork froze halfway to his mouth. Granddaughter? He had imagined this reunion for decades, but never once had he pictured that the little girl he lost had grown up to raise a child of her own. Sarah reached into her purse and slid a photo across the table. A young girl, maybe 12 years old, with a grin that could light up a room. Brown eyes, just like her mother's and just like his. John's hands trembled as he picked up the picture. He whispered, almost to himself, "She looks like you did at that age." Sarah nodded. "Her name is Emily, and she knows about you. I've told her that you might be someone special she should meet." Can you imagine the flood of emotions John felt? A lifetime of regret colliding with the sudden chance at not just reconciliation, but a second chance. The opportunity to be the grandfather he never got to be the father he wanted to be. They agreed to meet the very next weekend. John barely slept those nights, pacing his house, rehearsing what he might say. He pulled out that old shoebox again, found the photo of Sarah as a child, and placed it beside Emily's picture. 2 generations. 2 miracles. And when Saturday came, John drove to a park where families gathered under tall oaks, kids tossing footballs and parents grilling burgers. He spotted Sarah first, standing by a bench. Then, beside her, a young girl clutching a book against her chest. "Emily." John froze. How do you walk up to your own granddaughter for the first time? John took a deep breath and stepped forward. His boots crunched on the gravel path, and Emily looked up. Their eyes met, and for a split second, it was as if time folded in on itself. He saw his daughter at that same age, running through the yard in pigtails. Emily tilted her head, studying him with curiosity. Then she asked the simplest, yet most powerful question, "Are you really my grandpa?" John's throat tightened, but he smiled through the tears welling in his eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." She didn't hesitate. She rushed forward and hugged him, wrapping her arms around his waist. And in that moment, John felt the weight of 40 years lift off his shoulders. He wasn't just a man who had lost his daughter anymore. He was a grandfather, given a second chance to love, to guide, to leave a legacy. They spent that afternoon together. Emily showed him the drawings she kept in her book, sketches of classic cars, believe it or not. John laughed, realizing that somehow, without ever knowing him, she had inherited his love for engines and chrome. Sarah watched from the bench, tears in her eyes, finally seeing the family she had long been denied begin to heal. Before they left, Emily asked, "Grandpa, will you come to my school play next month?" John's voice cracked as he answered, "I wouldn't miss it for the world." And for the first time in decades, he drove home not with emptiness in his chest, but with a heart full of hope. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more untold history and classic stories. Because sometimes, life doesn't just give you back what you've lost. Sometimes, it gives you more than you ever dreamed. Fathers may lose years, but love never loses its way home.